Zohran Hamdani got elected to fix New York's housing affordability problems, but it's only gotten worse since he took office. New numbers show the median Manhattan rent has hit a new record high at just over $5,000 a month.
So after freezing rents for 2 million apartments, New York's mayor has declared the city affordable, but $5,000 rents? That's not affordable. Instead, these skyrocketing costs are the obvious result of an ever decreasing housing supply triggered by laws that guarantee people locked in rents forever unless they move out. So they don't. And since this stops landlords from making money doing what they do for a living, no
Zohran Mamdani got elected to fix New York's housing affordability problems, but it's only gotten worse since he took office. New numbers show the median Manhattan rent has hit a new record high at just over $5,000 a month.
So, after freezing rents for 2 million apartments, New York's mayor has declared the city affordable, but $5,000 rents? That's not affordable. Instead, these skyrocketing costs are the obvious result of an ever-decreasing housing supply triggered by laws that guarantee people locked-in rents forever unless they move out, so they don't. And since this stops landlords from making money doing what they do for a living, nobody wants to build in New York anymore, creating a nightmare the communists never anticipated.
Of course this failed. You're doubling down on stupid. More regulation, more government control has never, ever led to lower prices.
And we're so excited that the Rent Guidelines Board decided to freeze the rent not just for 1 year, but for the first time in New York City history for 2 years.
I cannot tell you what this means to senior citizens. We're on a fixed income. The prices of everything has gone up.
What the mayor doesn't say is that these buildings will soon turn into ghettos and slums and that everybody will continue leaving New York.
They are putting rent controls in place and capping the ability of private owners to charge a certain amount. However, they are requiring them to modernize and upgrade the apartments. And so what has happened in New York is that these property owners are saying, we're not going to upgrade the apartment, we're not going to fill it, we'll take the tax write-off.
And as this spreads throughout the country, very much like an uncontrollable form of cancer, the country itself will be taken down.
So frozen rents are going to be phase one in the total destruction of New York's housing market. And what nobody's talking about is that if you're going to freeze rents on 2 million apartments, landlords whose costs are not frozen at all, well, they've got to get that money from somewhere. And the place they get it from brings us to phase two. You see, most landlords own a hodgepodge of apartments. They've got free market apartments inside buildings that also have these stabilized frozen rent apartments. And if your neighbor has one of those, but your landlord's costs to run the building keep going up, he's got to get the money from somewhere, and he's going to get it by raising your rent. So now you get to pay for your neighbor's frozen rent, but that's not all, because landlords are limited in how much they can raise your rent if you're already living in a free market apartment, which brings us to phase three. And this is where things get truly frightening, because in the ground floor of most of these buildings, you'll see something else called a storefront. And inside, you'll find a small business, a bodega, a pizza parlor, run by someone living the American dream in spite of New York's communist attempts to destroy it and steal it. Well, guess what? That person's rent is not frozen either, which means it's going to go up in order to subsidize the 2 million apartments that now have their rates locked in forever. And that brings us to the real reason New York is about to experience the worst affordability disaster in American history. The prices you pay for your apartment, those might be set in stone, but when you go to the grocery store, when you buy anything, when you do anything, all of those costs are about to go through the roof. And that explains why in New York you see a tale of two cities all falling apart at the exact same time. You've got millions of people walking the streets, yet there are empty storefronts everywhere because the businesses inside couldn't afford to stay, which makes no sense. You'd think with all this foot traffic there should be a thriving economy, but we don't have that at all in New York. We've got an economy that is imploding in real time. Nobody can afford anything, nobody can run anything, and the free grocery stores that cost $30 million each to build, those aren't gonna help either. But in spite of all this, the mayor is out there celebrating the poverty everyone in New York is about to experience, except for him. Watch.
I wanted to come and bring everybody a happy rent freeze cake. I know it might be a little early for cake.
We don't care.
Happy rent free.
Happy rent freeze.
Really, you don't know what that means.
Yes, that's right. So
Especially when you're on a fixed ticket. Out of bed to see me at school.
Anyone would like a slice?
Yes.
I'm so glad to celebrate this morning with all of you, because at the heart of this are tenants. And you all have helped to build this city. You've given stability to this city. It's time the city brings some stability to you. And we're so...
But how's that going to happen? How is there going to be stability just because people have frozen rent? The costs associated with running these buildings, those haven't been frozen. We're literally watching the communists try to have their cake and eat it too, and as you're about to see, it's just not gonna work. It's already not working. You've got people here overjoyed at the idea that they won't have to write an extra rent check for increases that in the past have been 1% to 2% of what they pay on an annual basis, which is already a bargain deal. Now, yes, if you're on a fixed income, every dollar counts, absolutely, but when those dollars come out of your grocery budget instead of your rent budget, who's better off? Absolutely nobody. So there's not going to be stability. People are going to experience more instability. And if that grocery store that you were shopping at that down the street just shut down because it's closed, it can't afford to operate, now you got to travel further to feed yourself. And the crazy thing about this is anyone with any experience running a building in New York City would have known what a disaster this was. Watch.
Congratulations, congratulations, congratulations to all the renters out there. You guys did it. You guys got the rent frozen, and for the next 2 years, there will be no increases. Perfect. Now, that doesn't mean that the expenses have gone down. That doesn't mean that taxes, insurance, water, energy, labor, none of that went down. So I'm not sure if we were struggling to make the numbers before. I'm not sure how we're going to fix that boiler, how we're going to provide you hot water, fix that broken elevator.
So your rent might be frozen, but you too might be frozen because the landlord can't afford to heat your building anymore in the wintertime or give you enough hot water. The costs to run these places, those go up every single year. Also, if your landlord happens to be a millionaire, the mayor has already said they're not paying their fair share, so their personal taxes are gonna go up. Guess where they're gonna get the money to pay those? And the worst part about this is whether you live in a free market apartment where the landlord can charge anything, or you live in one of these stabilized frozen rent apartments, in a lot of buildings, the property owner is required to pay for the hot water, the cold water, and the heat, no matter how much of it you use. And since the city delivers some of these utilities, let's just say that they haven't frozen those costs either. Check this out.
On July 1st, New York City will raise water and sewer rates another 6%.
Oh!
All right, 6% may not sound too crazy, but here's why it's a problem. This isn't the first or second increase. In fact, this is the 6th straight increase in 5 years. Last year's increase was 8.5%, and in just a few weeks, another 6%. In the past 5 years alone, New York City's water and sewer rates will have increased 35%.
Wow.
The building didn't get any bigger. Tenants aren't using 35% more water. The bill just keeps going up. Water isn't the only cost increasing. Property taxes, labor, insurance, utilities. This is what financial distress looks like.
And here's the problem that nobody's talking about. When rents weren't frozen on these 2 million rent-regulated apartments that the mayor can have a rent freeze happen in, the increases that these landlords were getting, they were getting 1% to 2% a year anyways, which didn't even cover the costs that were rising beneath them. And now those increases are a flat zero for the next 2 years, which just makes the whole thing worse. But now the irony is the same mayor that is freezing rents because landlords are greedy is then jacking up the costs to operate those buildings through the city's own water utility that these landlords have to pay for. They have to pay for the person who pays 0 rent increases over the next 2 years, use all the water they want. There's nothing they can do about it. And when buildings fall down and rents go up because there are now less apartments, people are going to complain that the affordability situation here isn't any better at all. But predictably, this is not the end. Things keep getting worse. Check this out.
What they are doing is the exact opposite. Yep. They are creating a calamity in New York's housing market.
I just want to bring President Trump into this.
What the mayor doesn't say is that these buildings will soon turn into ghettos and slums and that everybody will continue leaving New York. And as this spreads throughout the country, very much like an uncontrollable form of cancer, the country itself will be taken down.
Yeah, but what he's talking about there is specific to the fact that you have private property ownership, and they are putting rent controls in place and capping the ability of private owners to charge a certain amount. However, they are requiring them to modernize and upgrade the apartments. And so what has happened in New York for a number of years now is that these property owners are saying, we're not going to upgrade the apartment. We're not going to fill it. We'll take the tax write-off.
Here's why that is. You've got these apartments that are so beat up and are so derelict because someone was living in them for decades and just moved out, and they've got stabilized rents. Some are $500, some are $800, some are even less. Others can be around $1,000. The point is, these are places with a locked-in rent that is so low. If the landlord wants to rent the place out, they legally can't do it unless they pour hundreds of thousands of dollars into an apartment that will never earn hundreds of thousands of dollars. And there is no way around this. You can't take an apartment that requires $100,000 worth of work and tell the renter, hey, I'll rent it to you, but you have to go and pay for all the work yourself. That's not legal. That will get the landlord in a lot of trouble. They could even pay massive fines. There could be terrible repercussions. There is literally no way around this. There's no wiggle room, so these places just sit empty. And our friend Spencer Pratt in Los Angeles, he makes a great analogy here. He says, what if you were to take the frozen rent going on with apartments in New York and apply that to some other industry? And he gives the example here of hamburgers. Well, if hamburgers become a human right, just like apartments, and let's say you cap the price at $4. Well, if you can't charge more than $4 to a hamburger, what type of hamburger do you think you're gonna be getting if the costs to produce those hamburgers go up and up and up and up and up every single year? The wages, the insurance, the fees, the taxes on the business, if all that goes up, but you can only charge $4 a burger, that burger is gonna shrink until it stops existing. There will be no burger. You're gonna have the thinnest smash burgers on planet Earth. They are gonna be like a sheet of paper. That's gonna be your burger because there's just not gonna be any money for the ingredients of the actual burger. But hey, it's a human right. You destroy any industry once you do this. But there's another problem. These buildings that are falling apart, landlords can't afford to fix them. Some of you in the comments have pointed out, oh, well, why don't they just sell the building to a developer? Well, you can go ahead and sell it to whoever you want, but they're still bound by the laws that made that building an absolute nightmare to own. Even if you sell that building to some of the richest people on planet Earth and they pour billions of dollars into it to fix it up, they're not going to be able to raise the rents. The law does not allow that. These places will always be rotting, decaying places that have potential that will forever be locked up because the law just does not allow it, making the entire housing crisis here much, much worse. And the only way out of this is for landlords to take these stabilized apartments if they become empty, and when the free market apartment next to them, above them, below them, or beneath them also becomes empty, to do some sort of combination, to build a staircase that combines the two units, to knock down a wall and make a couple of studios into a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom and then charge market rate. That's the only way out. Or the landlords can just wait. They could say, you know what? This building has existed for hundreds of years. Why am I gonna put a tenant in one of these stabilized apartments and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars renovating it, knowing I will never get the money back, when in the future, the law could change? They're waiting to see if the laws change in some manner in New York. I don't know how they're going to. I don't know how long it's going to take. This might have to go all the way to the Supreme Court for something to happen, but if it does happen, people who didn't rent their apartments and lose money will be better off. Which brings us to the real reason we now have $5,000 plus rents everywhere else. Watch.
Zoran Amdani got elected to fix New York's housing affordability problems, but it's only gotten worse since he took office. New numbers show the median Manhattan rent has hit a new record high at just over $5,000 a month, up 7% from last year. So I don't know, maybe demonizing landlords is not a cure-all. I want to get a sharp opinion out of you today, Mike. So what do you think about this?
We haven't had one yet.
I'm undecided.
You know, I can see it both ways, says Michael Lee.
Of course this failed. Of course it did. Like, you're doubling down on stupid. All right? And, like, it's more regulation, more government control has never, ever, ever led to lower prices. Right? Like, what you have in New York is you have a supply problem, right? And that's caused by excess regulation. It's really hard to build here. It's really hard to develop.
Right. So if you can't build anything, and if you're going to terrify everybody who could build something by letting them know that if they build something, the city can come along and take it and claim it and rewrite the rule book after they've spent their billions, you're not going to get new apartments, and the apartments you have, those are not going to get fixed up. That's why the rents on places that are free market are extremely high. But there's another reason for that, because in order for this whole rent freeze to work the way the mayor wanted, another law had to get passed, and that law was called just cause eviction. And what just cause eviction does is it says if you live in a free market apartment, the landlord can charge whatever they want before you move in. But after you move in, if you pay your rent on time, the landlord is limited. In the free market apartments, they can only charge you a maximum of 10% increase on whatever your rent is, or 5% plus inflation whatever happens to be lower. So even in the free market apartments, the rents are limited. Now, what does that do? That means that if you're a landlord and you have a free market apartment, you've got to do some math in your head. You've got to say, well, my average tenant stays for how long? 3 years, 4 years? Well, okay, if I need a certain amount of money every single month to break even after 4 years of having a tenant, I better jack up my rent to a certain level right now. So this has pushed rents up in advance. Because once a person moves in, the rent increases are capped. And if rents are rising at, say, 15% on the open market, but once people move in, they're getting, 5, 7, 10% increases. The landlords have to play that game and raise rents even higher than they would if we were in a free market. Because if they don't do that, after just a couple of years, they're going to be underwater on their free market units. This is a total disaster. But there's another problem to all of this, because there's people who just had their rent frozen and they just ate cake with the mayor and celebrated and talked about how great and how wonderful and how awesome this was. But what about the people paying $5,000 a month? Where's their rent freeze? Why are they paying so much to live somewhere? Pretty soon, the people that live in those apartments, they're going to be like, hey, Mayor Mamdani, why don't you help us out? Where's our frozen rent? Where's the help you promised us? We're not getting any help. We can't afford to live here. Some people can, and that's not fair. Help us out. And the mayor's going to be all too happy to freeze their rents as well. If you think for a second that frozen rent was just going to affect this little pocket of 2 million apartments over here, it's going to affect every apartment at some point, because everybody here wants communism to rescue them from the problems communism is causing. And that's just going to make everything here worse. But what if New York has a different mayor? Will things change?
Listen, I'll say this about Mamdani. He has pretty much said what he wanted to do. Like, if you listen to what he said before he's elected, I want to get as many socialists, communists elected, and then take over. And that's what he's doing. It doesn't matter whether you hate ugly colonizing women. It doesn't matter if you founded a group at Columbia with the express point of overthrowing Western society. Right. You get elected. So I think scary is a fair word right now. Sometimes I like to live in my head like, oh, the politics won't hit the everyday street, but it's crazy what's going on right now, and I don't know how you can't be scared.
Well, what would you do about it? I mean, there's going to be a lot of money thrown around. This city is the financial capital of the world. He's talking about seizing property. They're talking about capping net worth. Would you ever step up and do anything about that?
So I've always thought I would never get involved in politics. I think you can do more in the private sector. This and what is going on has actually made me pause that thought. I was saying to you, that old Plato quote, if you don't do your public service and run for office, you're doomed to be run by basically dummies. Right. And right now, I feel like that's what's happening. Now, not everyone's getting out to vote. I think what the Democrats have done is they've let the fox into the hen house. Right. And now he's just running rampant and kicking them all out. Right. So it's a scary time. We need leaders to step up.
Is Dave Portnoy gonna step up? He sounds incredibly reasonable. As a business owner who doesn't want to see communism take over America, that's got to be your platform. That's it. Just, hey, don't take away private property from people. Don't steal from those who work hard. Bring back police. Bring back jails. Bring back jumpsuits. I mean, you could have a simple message of common sense and stand a real chance of getting elected, even in a place like Los Angeles, where Spencer Pratt did really well, or in New York City. Could somebody who's not Mayor Mamdani win in New York? Will he be a 2-term mayor? Will there be any apartments left? Let me know. I'll see you in the next video. Iran thought the U.S. was finished and that they could retake Hormuz. Listen to this.
Last month you said Iranian leaders were very rational people, nice people to deal with, strong people, smart people. Today you said they were sick people and being led by sick people. What changed, and do you think...
I got to know them. So I've said that about a lot. Now, when you say rational, I think they're much more rational than level 1, level 2. Level 1 is gone, level 2 is gone. This is level 3. I think they are more rational, but based on their actions over the last week or two, they're not doing a service to the people.
No.
And I think more than anything else is I got to know them, and I'm not sure I want to make a deal with them. We can play games, but I'm not sure I want to make a deal. Let's just finish the job. Yeah, please go ahead.
But Trump said something very interesting after the recent U.S. military action. He says their leaders are now calling him once again, but he's not picking up the phone. And he also said they're coming after him personally.
Were you aware of any credible threat by Iran against Air Force One?
I have a threat all the time. I'm number 1 on their list before you. But if I go, you go, right?
But was there a specific
perhaps someday you want to change professions. What do you have, Daniel?
It's in conclusion that there are strikes ongoing in Iran.
We just hit them very hard. And I say we hit them 20-1. Every time they hit us, we're going to hit them 20. And we did it last night. They did a little something today, but it was really retribution for last night. They hit actually 3 boats, not 2. And when they hit, we hit back much harder.
And this is the part that has everybody totally confused, because a couple of weeks ago, Iran was given a deal that was so awful. The United States never should have agreed to it, that Trump was a fool for offering it to him, and all of this was just going to empower them and embolden them. And what did they do with that deal? They rejected it. Their actions today show they don't want that deal. There is nothing that you could give this regime to get them to stop going after ships in the Strait of Hormuz, their neighboring countries that have nothing to do with this conflict. The entire deal that everybody said was bad for America was actually put out there to expose who we're actually dealing with.
Are we returning to a full-scale military conflict, sir?
I don't know. I don't know. We'd win it very quickly. It's another way of doing it. We have many ways we can win, but we've already won militarily. They have very little.
Yep.
They have very little left, and they want to make a deal so badly. They called a little while ago. They want to make a deal so badly. I just don't know if they're worthy of making a deal. I don't know that they're going to honor the deal. That's
wow.
If they want to make a deal, why do you think they attacked commercial vessels?
Good question.
Because it's sort of crazy, to be honest with you. They're
wow.
sort of crazy. They're a little bit out of control, but they want to make a deal. Badly.
So now, the same president that the world thought had been tricked and had been played by Iran, and that certain Republicans in the United States were saying, oh, they've got the best of Trump. He doesn't know what he's doing. He says he's a great negotiator, doesn't know anything. Well, now he says you can't make a deal with Iran. And we're supposed to believe that he didn't have any idea this was going to be the conclusion of this operation. At the same time, some people think the U.S. has been totally defeated and has lost. Listen to this.
The very tall gentleman who's very insecure, he doesn't want to ask the question. He's a handsome guy, but he's very insecure. Go ahead.
Yet, the Iran war seems to be a strategic dead end for you. Why are you apparently unable to end the Iran war?
So I think we're doing just the opposite. The Iran war has been a tremendous military success. And, you know, I can only answer the question by saying they're not going to have a nuclear weapon. I think I was there for one reason, that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. I call it, we denuclearize Iran, and that's happened. They will never have a nuclear weapon. That stuff is so far down under a mountain. It's a granite mountain that collapsed on top of it. Take months to get it out. I think it's a tremendous success, Iran. And you see the oil prices are lower than they were when I started. And people like to say that, but look, they have no military left. Their air force is gone. As I said, their ships are gone. 159 ships are gone. They're at the bottom of the sea. Their radar's gone. Everything's gone. So when you say not a success, it's a tremendous success. The fake news likes to say how well they're doing. They're doing terribly. They have 350% inflation. When the war started, they had like 6%, 5%. They have, they want to make a deal, but they don't know how to make a deal. And then they go around shooting ships at night. I don't like that. You know, they're dealing with very fine people. They're dealing with Steve Witkoff. They're dealing with Jared Kushner and J.D. Vance. And they're dealing with Marco and Scott. They're dealing with great people. But I don't know. I think they're a little loco. They're a little crazy. Don't forget what we did should have been done 47 years ago. It could have been done any time within 40. This has gone on for, they were the bully of the Middle East. So they're a much different country. Now, in one day, all of their
So the idea that this is a strategic dead end for Trump can only exist if you're looking at the presence of U.S. military assets in the Middle East and thinking to yourself that there's something weird going on here. But when Trump says that this is a strategic success, well, I'll tell you what he's talking about. The prediction for oil was $200-300 a barrel. It hasn't hit that much. Why? Well, here you go. OPEC is no longer relevant in a changing energy world. How is the energy world changing? Well, here you go. Venezuela is now producing oil and selling it on the open market. The United States is a big exporter of oil now. Ships are coming here to our hemisphere to get things they used to get for the Middle East. And the members of OPEC, they're getting their own oil out around the Strait of Hormuz. They're starting to do their own things. Every man is now for himself as far as oil producing countries go, and that is a good thing for global energy prices. That's the best thing for global energy prices. So while you have energy prices dropping and you have the US and Venezuela and Guyana and our hemisphere becoming a major hub for oil exports, and you have Iran not being able to threaten the free world or control the Strait of Hormuz, which they think is some sort of asset for their country, you have a strategic success that totally eclipses the thinking of people who look at the U.S. and look at Trump and only see failure.
The world is taking you at your word, sir, that the MOU is over, that the ceasefire is over. What happens next, sir? Are we on the cusp of a full-scale return to full conflict?
Well, I'll tell you what happens next.
we're never going to see Iran have a nuclear weapon because that's much more important than the numbers you're talking about. The prices of oil are dropping like a rock. Now they'll be up a little bit, and this will end very quickly. We have an oil glut right now because we got all those boats out of the strait, and it's going to drop, and I predicted everything. I've been right about everything, and I have been for a long time.
Oh, they don't want to hear that.
Down. Now, I have to make sure of one thing, that we don't have lunatics having control over nuclear weapons. So we have that now. There's no way they have a nuclear weapon. We have cameras, as an example, on the site that those beautiful B-2s at 1 o'clock in the morning 10 months ago blew up. They blew it up. We have cameras, that's called Space Force, if they're in space. But we have cameras that can read the badge of the person going over to a site with shovels. Well, shovels won't get you there. The biggest machinery in the world probably won't get you there, if you want to know the truth.
Everyone laughed at Trump when he started the Space Force. Oh, a Space Force. We don't need a Space Force. Yeah, actually we do. Because we need to know what's going on. And now that Space Force is keeping an eye on the nuclear material that Iran might want to try and get out of the ground. We can see exactly what's going on over there. They have no control over their airspace. We can see them from space. They've lost control over the Strait of Hormuz. They can claim they've got control over it. They can threaten ships that are in it, but they're not having any effect over global energy prices. Global energy prices are dropping. No matter what they do, they have zero leverage, and now we're watching them. Does that sound like a strategic failure to you, to anybody? Who would call that a strategic failure?
It's way, way below. But we're watching that, and if anybody goes there, they get blown up. So nobody's going to touch that. Eventually, we'll take it. But what we do have is we have that. That's gone. If we wouldn't have had that, they would have had a nuclear weapon, and they would have wiped out Israel. If I weren't president, Israel wouldn't exist. And we did it 2 times. When the JCPOA, the Obama deal, when that was originally conceived, everything went to Iran. 1.7 billion in cash, hundreds of billions of dollars. They thought they could buy peace with these people. You can't do that.
And this is how Trump's deal with Iran was different, but also good enough that it totally exposed what their leaders were up to and why they don't want to make a deal. You see, the Obama deal with Iran, it gave them everything, and then it expected that something would happen, that they would do something, which of course they never did, or else we wouldn't be where we're at today. But Trump's deal, what did it give them? It gave them a piece of paper, which was as worthless as the piece of paper Neville Chamberlain held up in 1936, because Iran's signature was on that paper too. And they didn't abide by anything that was in the agreement. But you know what? It didn't matter. That's what's so crazy, is while this deal was out there, everyone's saying, how can we do this? They're not going to abide by anything. Of course, everyone knew that. That was the whole purpose of this memorandum of understanding, which is now over. But now the question is, why is Iran still going so hard after the Strait of Hormuz? Why is this something that they just cannot let go of? Why is it something that they want to claim total control over, and why they will not even agree to that and things like the memorandum of understanding?
You know, for our audience to understand, when Iran looks at the Straits of Hormuz, they really see that as a strategic asset. And controlling that is equivalent in their minds to having nuclear weapons.
Wow.
And I'm not over exaggerating this. And the reality is, why is that? Because it gives them significant strategic influence in the region, geopolitical blackmail in a sense. It gives them leverage to bend the nations in the region to their will if they're controlling the flow of oil out of the Gulf. That's the reality of it. Their strategic objectives from the outset have been what? 1, dominate and control the Middle East. 2, control the distribution of oil out of the Gulf, destroy Israel, drive the United States out. So right from the initial objectives for 47 years, the control of distribution of oil has always been a strategic objective. And that is why we're witnessing a modified battle for the Straits of Hormuz here.
Well, now the question is, why is it that Iran didn't try to take over the Strait of Hormuz in the past? Well, they wanted to, but if you know anything about world history, they haven't been able to until something very important happened in the 1980s. They were at war with Iraq, and Iran was in the weaker strategic position with the weaker Air Force. They did have a strong position along the Strait of Hormuz to threaten tankers, but their ability to totally control the area was disputed. They did not have that ability. Then in the 1990s, we had Operation Desert Storm, and an international coalition took charge over the Middle East and stopped a dictator from taking control over Kuwait. Kuwait's oil and from being an aggressor in the area, which sent a message to the regimes in that area that, hey, if you try this, you could be next. But then what happened? Oh, we had the Obama-Iran deal. We had the thing that empowered Iran to become the Iran that almost had a nuclear weapon. They needed to be empowered. They needed to build up. Somebody running America helped them do that. That person's successor in 2020 continued that. And that got them to a point where they thought they might be strong enough to someday exert influence over the Strait of Hormuz, which is why right now they're trying desperately to exert any influence they can. They have been waiting for this for a very long time. They think this is their last chance to do it, and they hope that they can do it and make it to the midterm elections when hopefully Trump is finished.
And they are not going to give in to this, in my judgment, and it will likely lead to return to major combat operations because it means that much to them. And I think the reason why the MOU had this ambiguity in it that we all looked at and said, what, that doesn't make any sense. Remember, the straits would be open immediately. We would release the blockade. But then in the written description of it, in 60 days, Iran and Oman can begin discussions about administration and services with the Straits.
Wow.
And that smacked of what? That smacked of giving them some kind of control. It didn't make any sense.
Well, it did once you realize that this deal that was going to embolden Iran and give them control over the Strait of Hormuz wasn't even good enough for them. They didn't even want that, and that was the deal that they signed with President Trump and then broke for some reason. So that shows you what's really going on here. And the reason for that is because they don't want any conditions over their ability to threaten the world economy. They don't want any conditions over their ability to exert their power and influence. And anything they've signed with anybody represents a condition that represents leverage that somebody else might have over them, some agreement that they're supposed to abide by. That's why there can be no deal, as President Trump has said. He says he doesn't think he can even make one.
I think the Iranians insisted on that kind of language in there, or there wasn't going to be a deal.
And there still
Don't know
wasn't.
the facts of that, but I'm speculating here. But it just shows you how important this is. That ambiguity is in there, and in a sense gives them some leverage here to what they're doing, except for firing on ships. Once they fired on ships, that obviously broke the ceasefire and entered President Trump and the action he's taken here. He is not going to put up with this. And at the same time, we're going to continue to move ships through the straits, which we are doing right as we speak. And that is a form of distribution of oil that's continuing. Likely to be some slowdown because of the hostilities to a certain degree. But this is a strategic asset, and the Iranians, I'm convinced, will dig in their heels over this.
And the reason they are is because this entire time, the U.S. has been getting ships out through the Strait of Hormuz. The blockade that we have there and Iran's lack of control and lack of ability to exert any influence over this area has allowed the U.S. Navy to get boats out. And between that and the rewiring of the global energy landscape has essentially made this entire part of the world irrelevant. So Iran is fighting over something that is becoming more and more worthless every single day. And by not signing a deal, they're essentially dooming their ability to even be a regime because the world is not going to sit around. The world is reorientating itself around the reality that the Strait of Hormuz is not a safe place to get your energy. And energy prices, like Trump said, are lower than before this conflict started. They're back down to where they were. We will see some fluctuations, but they're dropping. And how are they dropping if the one place everybody gets their oil from has been a strategic disaster for the U.S. and for the entire world? I mean, that was the message that the fake news wanted to hit the president with at this NATO summit, but it's not happening. Oil prices are where they're supposed to be. They're headed in the right direction. Ships are headed in the right direction. They're headed to Venezuela. They're headed to the United States. OPEC has disintegrated. Those countries are now functioning in their own best interest, not part of an oil cartel anymore. This is a great thing for energy prices. This is a great thing for freedom. And this is a great thing for the safety of countries that were once threatened by a regime that was getting rich off its strategic ability to blackmail the rest of us. What do you think about that? I'll see you in the next video.
Oh yeah, right on the back door.
Evacuation order. For your safety, evacuate the area now.
If you're planning on visiting a California state park, there are new rules for canceling a reservation. You must now cancel a week or more in advance of your visit to get a refund. After that, you'll be charged the first night's fee. If you cancel 2 days or less before your visit, you'll lose the entire fee. And you'll be banned from making a reservation for a year if you are a no-show 3 times in a calendar year.
Four years into this war, ordinary Russians have started doing something the Kremlin spent 25 years making sure could never happen. They're speaking on camera using their real names and publicly questioning Vladimir Putin. They're questioning his decisions, his corruption, and even his mistresses. As if that wasn't bad enough, Zelensky also gave a warning that Putin is not ready for. And it's not really a warning, it's a promise. In his new interview, Zelensky said that within weeks, there are going to be thousands of Ukrainian drones that will be arriving in Moscow every single day. Right now, Moscow is getting hit with hundreds of drones, let's say once a week, but thousands every single day is definitely this war going to an intensity that Putin is not prepared for. So in this video, I want to walk you through the specific breakdown of fear that's happening across Russia right now. Then we also talk about the influencer who has millions of followers who just publicly told Putin that she's not afraid of him. And of course, the best news story of this war. A Russian politician who's just losing his mind on live camera. He was asked, why isn't he on the front lines? And then we got a meltdown that I don't think we have ever seen before. But first, let's start with ordinary Russian men doing something ordinary Russians just simply did not do 4 years ago. I think you know what I mean. My name is Sam, you're watching Business Basics, and let's start with the biggest story. I think you guys know the biggest threat to Putin's power is not sanctions or not even this war. It's Russian public not being afraid of him. And that's something we've been talking about for a very long time. Well, guess what? It's starting to happen. Russian people are now publicly criticizing Putin directly. All this time, they would criticize the politicians, they would maybe criticize the army, but they wouldn't name Putin himself. But now they're calling out his corruption, calling out his political decisions, and they're also calling out his personal life. They're calling in question his mistresses and his daughters. Take a look. Here's the clip.
Good evening, Vladimir Vladimirovich. You know, Vladimir Vladimirovich, let me tell you a little secret. There's a gas station around here that actually has gasoline. Can you believe it? The only catch is the line. You have to wait a couple of hours. I could send you the location, but keep it a secret. Otherwise, the line will stretch for several more kilometers. Tell me, Vladimir Vladimirovich, how is it that missiles and drones can freely fly across Russian territory and destroy oil refineries and fuel storage facilities?
Которые уничтожают НПЗ, хранилища.
What happened? After 25 years, nobody bothered to build proper air defense? Where are all those S-300s, S-400s, and S-500s? Sold them to Turkey and everyone else, did you? Right. You had more important things to spend money on. Yourselves, palaces, yachts. How else was Volodya supposed to get another new yacht? I need one too. Where did all the money go, Vova? You stole everything, but forgot to protect the country. So what do we do now? Spend our nights waiting at gas stations and our days at work? By the way, where did Kabaeva go, Vova? Off on your yacht? Escorted by 2 warships? And this is supposedly wartime. Have you completely lost it? Russia is supposed to be defended. That's supposed to be your job, but you don't give a damn. Or maybe you simply can't. Is Kabaeva leaving? Or did she just go to pick up another handbag? Vova. Well, you know the rest.
Now, the woman named in that video is Alina Kaibva, who used to be the top gymnast in Russia, but now is widely reported to be Putin's mistress, maybe even his second wife. Russians have been quietly mocking this relationship in private for years, but now they're doing it publicly. Putin on one side lives in luxury with a much younger former athlete, while ordinary Russians are now lining up for gasoline in a country that supposedly runs on gasoline. People used to call Russia gas station of the world. Well, now not having gasoline really changes how the public sees Putin. By the way, it's not just one guy who's calling out Putin. It's happening across board. There's an ecosystem of public voices who are also joining in on this criticism. Just recently, a woman with millions of followers whose entire audience is something Putin probably didn't care much about because she used to be a fashion blogger, influencers, what do you want to call her? Well, she started publicly saying that she's not afraid of Putin because of the way he's running the country. She doesn't want to live in a country where you don't have internet, where you don't have gasoline, where you don't have access to like messaging services like Telegram. Now, before I show you guys this clip, I do want to talk about the ecosystem that I feel like we don't really talk about much as guys, because I don't know, even here in the United States, there's like a big online sphere of just women influencers that I know were big, or I knew they were big, but I didn't know how big they truly were. And guess what? I'm guessing Putin was probably in the same bucket where he didn't truly know how big this part of the online sphere is. And when this clip came out, it got 30 million views. The conversation became so big that Kremlin had to respond. So that's why we're covering this, because it's not just the fact that what she's saying, it's also how people were reacting after this video came out. And that tells us a lot about how much of a discontent there truly is across board in Russia. Take a listen.
Where are we going anyway? What wilderness are they leading us into? They shut down Instagram, Telegram, YouTube. They took everything. The internet was completely cut off everywhere. Okay, now let's take some more cattle and just turn off the water and electricity and sit there, die. I don't know where this is all heading. I understand that, of course, some means indeed security measures need to be taken. But here this is already something. Some kind of excess, it seems to me. And overkill. We need to get back on our feet. We need to get up as a whole society and talk about this. What it is, it's unacceptable. What the fuck is this fucking bullshit? It doesn't look like anything. We will not remain silent.
Her name is Victoria Bonya. She is a former Russian television presenter and current international fashion influencer. She does not live in Russia. I think she used to visit a lot. She lives in Monaco, but her following is all Russian. If you go to her page, it's all in Russian, so you can assume very easily that most of the people following her are from Russia. Now, this video that she put out is actually an 18-minute long video, which got 30 million views, and she talks about a lot of different issues she has with Putin. But I want to read this line, which is probably the most impactful. This is the line everyone in Russia is talking about. She says, and I quote, "People are afraid of you, Putin. Bloggers are afraid, artists are afraid, governors are afraid, but people should not be afraid of their president. I am not afraid." Now, her video is a call to revolution, but the reaction to it is more telling than the content. First, we had the leader of the Communist Party inside of Russia saying that if Putin doesn't take this video seriously, there might be a Russian Revolution 2.0, another Bolshevik revolution. I guess you can see why a communist leader is saying that, but nonetheless, the fact that he's replying to a fashion influencer on Instagram definitely tells us something. And it wasn't just the communist guy who's replying. We even had the Kremlin spokesperson Peskov who said her concerns are legitimate and he's going to look into it. Then we had Kremlin's favorite propagandist, Salvoy, who called her worn out. You can read what it is. Then we had another presenter warning Kremlin of a revolt among women whose businesses are closing, who cannot keep up with rising mortgage rates, and whose children are being denied access to higher education. This will be the biggest divorce with authorities that Russia has ever seen. Most Russians are apolitical and wary of the government. They declared their support for the war simply to avoid personal consequences. But now, polls are showing that most want this war to be over with as soon as possible. Kremlin before used to use their silence as proof, but now Russians are speaking out against the war publicly. So Kremlin no longer can claim that, hey, look, no one's complaining about the war, that means they support it. That's what they used to do in 2022, 2023. And now another important thing to pay attention here is the polling numbers that are coming out of Russia. Now, of course, we cannot really trust the polls because they're always rigged, but at the start of the war in the first 2 years, polls always showed that, hey, support for the war and support for Putin is extremely high. But over the last few months in 2026, those polling numbers, even though they are rigged, they are coming down. So even though we cannot trust a specific number, I think the direction, the fact that the rigged polls are going down, that does tell us something about how Russians are truly feeling and how Kremlin is reacting to all this. Meaning, I'm sure Kremlin somehow, one way or another, they control the polling numbers. So if Kremlin itself is putting out numbers that show that the support has gone down, that means Putin knows that the support has gone down. Now, another thing to talk about here is the reason why everyone is complaining. And I guess this is really just human nature. It's not a Russian thing, where people don't really care if something is happening really far away from them and it doesn't affect them. Like Russians who are complaining right now, like the 2 videos we watched in this video and all the other videos, other clips we have seen so far. People are always complaining about, let's say, gas shortages or the internet being down or Telegram being down or Instagram being down. They are complaining about small things, all the while ignoring millions of Russians who are suffering on the front lines, who are dying on the front lines. The Russians really don't care about that, but they care about the consequences of the war that Putin started. I guess in a way this is just human nature where people put self-interest above anything else, but nonetheless it tells us something that only reason we are seeing complaints is because the war has come home. The fuel shortage that Russia is experiencing is because of drones hitting refineries and hitting oil depots, and internet being down is actually indirectly related to drones. You see, Starlink doesn't work over Russia. It's like geofenced. So even if Ukrainians have the Starlink terminal that's, legal, they can operate it, they cannot operate it over Russia because satellite just doesn't connect. So how Ukrainians have been getting around this issue is by using autonomous drone or by using Russian SIM cards or Russian, telecommunication signals. And that's why Putin has shut down internet. And when I say Putin has shut down internet, what he has really shut down is cellular internet, where no one can use the internet if they're on their SIM card. So drones hopefully cannot use it too. That's the hope, but unfortunately it doesn't look like Ukrainian drone strikes are going down. In fact, as Zelensky just promised, he wants to start sending 1,000 drones to Moscow if Putin doesn't agree to peace. Now, we'll talk about that promise in just a second, but before that, we need to talk about what's happening in the most important piece of territory that Putin has ever claimed. Right now, wealthy Russians are literally packing up their homes, packing up their bags, and leaving Crimea. I'm not even kidding. Take a look at this report. This report tracks a specific pattern that started roughly 2 weeks ago. Wealthy Russians in Crimea are now openly requesting relocation services through Telegram channels, moving assistance, antique transport, valuable transports. There are also advertisements popping up offering private helicopter or boat transport services out of Crimea. Now, in a way, it makes sense why Russians want to get out of Crimea. Take a look at what Ukraine has been doing for the last 5 years. We have made multiple videos on this topic, but nonetheless, here's the side effect or the full effect of what Ukraine has been doing. No fuel in Crimea, no electricity, banks are closed, store shelves becoming empty. Ukraine is imposing a logistical blockade by land and sea while destroying all energy infrastructure on the peninsula to force Russian occupiers to leave voluntarily. Now, to me, the most interesting part of this is that this operation, the logistical lockdown, that's what they're calling it, Ukrainians, this operation started roughly, let's say, 3-4 weeks ago, maybe 5 weeks, right, if you want to be generous. And in 5 weeks, we have Russians literally leaving the island. That tells you the grip Putin had on the island even before this whole thing began. And in fact, this exodus has gotten so bad that banks in Crimea are just shutting down withdrawals. They're telling customers, hey, you cannot take any money out right now, but how about come back later? Take a look at this clip.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention? No deposit withdrawals right now. Cash hasn't been delivered today.
Wait, we can't withdraw anything at all?
Until the cash delivery arrives, yes. Vans from the mainland haven't arrived. They aren't letting them into Crimea yet.
This is why some Russians who live in Crimea are now openly questioning that, hey, why do we even need Crimea? It's so much headache, we're spending so much money defending it, and we're not even succeeding in defending it, so why are we holding on to this territory? Why can't we just focus on our own country? That's what Russians are asking. Take a look.
What do Russians talk about while waiting in line for gasoline? You all know that protests of any kind are banned in Russia. Even solo pickets are prohibited. But the gasoline situation has turned into this kind of spontaneous rally. People are simply forced to stand in these lines and, naturally, discuss interesting topics. You know what they're talking about in the lines? They say, what the hell do we need your Crimea for? What the hell do we need these Ukrainians for, who are causing us all these problems? I'm quoting them directly. Yesterday, after I posted about lines in Crimea and the energy crisis, About 30 people messaged me privately. They're angry with the authorities, and these conversations are happening more and more often. This is what the beginning of the end looks like, Russians.
Now, this all brings us to the single greatest interview clip that has come out of Russia in this entire year. The clip is of a Russian State Duma deputy, meaning a sitting member of the Russian parliament, and he's running for re-election, so he's in his campaign season. He's going around campaigning, you know how politicians do all around the world. This interview is part of that campaign, and he's doing a public Q&A where the interviewer has questions from the citizens. Citizens submitted these questions, and the interviewer is reading these questions in front of the politician. And then he runs into a question that he probably wasn't expecting. The question is, if you support this war so strongly, why aren't you on the front lines? Why are you sitting here in Moscow, what you can assume in a luxurious palace or hotel room, whatever you want to assume? Why aren't you going to the front lines and fighting for what you believe in? Now, again, this is not a crazy out-of-pocket question. This is a very obvious question politicians at war deal with all the time. But the reaction, it seems like this guy was not ready for this question. And this is actually a replacement for the meme segment today because this interview is just that great. So, like always, if you enjoy it, hit the subscribe button down below. If you're already subscribed, just be sure to hit the like button. But here's that clip.
Truthfully, he doesn't say what for. So why is Deputy Zhuravlyov, who calls on everyone to unite, that life isn't important in Moscow today, a hike? That is completely insulting. Why? Because I am in Moscow right now, only because the elections are starting. That's the only reason I'm in Moscow. But generally, I've been there since 2014. I already said at the beginning that in the Pyatnashka unit, are you a participant of the SMO? No, I'm not a participant. How can you not be a participant of the SMO? Do you need a piece of paper? Do you need a fucking ID card? Or do you need actual participation? Go to Pyatnashka and ask what I do there. Listen, everyone. No, wait. I don't have a single state award, not a single one. Go ask on the front line where Zhuravlyov is. Go ask. What do you understand? Do you need an ID card? Shove that fucking ID card up your ass. Got it? So don't fucking throw claims at me that you're calling for things but aren't doing them yourself. I was the very first one there in 2014 when, bitch, absolutely none of you were there. None of you. I was the only one at Zakharchenko's inauguration. And you tell me, show your little document. I don't fucking need it. Because you didn't understand that all deputies are forbidden from participating there, except by permission. But Milonov is participating. I'm telling you once again, then there are tons of them there. Heroes? Look, please, I don't know where he participated. I know where I participated. And I have guys who died there. And I didn't die there not because I was hiding behind their backs. And I honestly don't give a fuck. So you're messing with the wrong guy, telling me where I fucking should be and where I shouldn't be sitting in Moscow. I don't fucking need you sitting here recording an interview with you. Go fuck yourself. Go there yourself. You go there yourself. You go there, Vasya. I go there yourself.
By the way, did you guys notice he had one of those plaques in the back? All the while, YouTube is technically banned in Russia. It's not officially banned, but if you're using, let's say, a Russian Wi-Fi or Russian internet or Russian cellular, I guess, if you have access to it, you cannot actually load the YouTube site. It just takes so long that no one uses it. But if you use a VPN, you can still access YouTube. So there are probably some Russians watching this video from Russia. But unofficially, the website is basically banned because anyone who doesn't have a VPN or doesn't know how to use a VPN cannot go to the website. All the while, there are people in Russia flexing the YouTube plaque. But coming back to the topic at hand, I guess it kind of makes sense why Putin doesn't really do unscripted interviews anymore. Imagine something like this happening with Putin, who's already getting kind of old, and I feel like everything he now reads or says in public is always scripted. Even in his interviews, if you pay attention, he was never looking at like the interviewer, he's looking to the side. And again, we don't know what's there, but if you were guessing, if you're a betting man, I would bet he's reading something that's like scripted or teleprompter when he's giving answers. So someone's giving him answers literally and then he's reading it off. And even these are very, very rare. Usually he just gives a speech where he's just very openly just reading from a paper, which makes sense. A lot of politicians read a speech, but Putin has kind of given up on interviews. But anyways, let's come back to Moscow, because fear in the city is the highest I have ever seen. Cops are cracking down even at the smallest sign of discontent. And I can't even understate this next story. You guys remember back in COVID, or I guess after COVID lockdowns, there were protests in China where Chinese cops were arresting anyone who was just showing a blank white paper because they were like, hey, we know what you mean to say, and you can't say that here in China, so you're getting arrested. Just for holding up a blank paper. Nothing on the paper at all, it was just a blank thing. Well, I think Moscow has reached the same level. Pay attention to the clip on your screen and I'll explain what's happening. So, this is a clip of a Russian teenager who's just standing on the sidewalk waving at a police van that's passing. We can assume it's a police van because of what's about to happen next. To me, it doesn't seem like he said anything. He's just waving goodbye. Maybe he's trying to be nice. Maybe it's not meant to be like, anything negative. But then, take a look at what happens. A police officer, fully geared out, comes running out, tackles him to the ground, and then arrests this guy. All for just waving. Waving goodbye. If that's not an overreaction, I don't know what is. And this is where it's important to remember. Moscow is the largest city in Europe, not just in Russia. It has, I think, 13 or 16 million people in one city. And this is the kind of environment they have to live in. Now, imagine what happens when 1,000 drones start arriving in the city because Putin doesn't want to shut down the war that he started. That's exactly what Zelensky is promising. Take a look at this statement. 2 days ago, Zelensky sat down with Financial Times for an interview, and this was probably the most shocking comment coming out of that interview. When our deep strikes were not reaching Moscow and St. Petersburg, Putin did not think much about it. He understood that the war was far from the Kremlin. Of course, once he feels what is happening in Moscow, he'll begin to understand what is happening in the Kursk, Belgrade, and Bryansk regions. He'll begin to grasp the reality of the situation. When not 100 drones, but 1,000 drones start reaching Moscow, when he feels it and sees it, he'll be advised to move somewhere beyond the Urals. So basically go more east, hide from Ukrainian drones. That will be the moment that opens up a new chapter on path towards ending the war. The farther Putin is from Moscow, the closer the end of the war and peace will be. He fears for his life. And then there are elites. Where do Russian elites live? Moscow and St. Petersburg, the two major cities. Those places will be reached because that is where they make decisions to kill us. That is why deep strikes have had and continue to have a major impact. We must keep working on this. It is constant, difficult, and daily work. We must all stay focused and energized. The heroes are on the front lines, and all of us, the entire state, must keep carrying shells to them. If we do, we'll bring a just and strong peace for Ukraine. That is what victory means for us. Now, it's not just Ukraine that's saying this war has changed. Kremlin also is kind of starting to admit it. Remember when Putin launched this war, he called it a special military operation? He really believed that in 3 days there would be Russian soldiers marching in Kyiv, celebrating in Kyiv. Well, now I guess they're dropping that term. They're not going to call it a special military operation anymore. We have Kremlin spokesperson publicly saying that this is now a war. Take a listen. Here we have Dmitry Peskov.
There is a war going on. It's a real war. Why it's a war? It all started as a special military operation, but it's continuing as a war because Kyiv is backed by Berlin, Paris, The Hague, Oslo, and unfortunately, Washington.
Now, here's what's interesting. Using the word war is actually a criminal offense in Russia right now. It has gotten journalists arrested, it has gotten civilians arrested too. But now Kremlin itself is changing the language that it's using. Now, this may not be Kremlin actually admitting defeat. The disturbing part is that it may actually be a legal groundwork for like a massive escalation. Maybe Putin wants to, do another round of mobilization, or maybe he wants to implement a state of emergency, or he wants to just shut down like basic freedoms that Russians are enjoying right now. Like, you know how they can go on internet and publish some videos criticizing Putin. But I feel like it's getting to him, and this may be his way of cracking down even more. By saying that this is a war against the West, he wants to basically prepare Russians for even more so of a lockdown than Russians have seen before. Because right now, even in Moscow, people are publicly talking about the fuel crisis. This is the capital of the country, and Russia cannot provide all the supplies that the citizens need. Take a listen to this woman.
Let's discuss the fact that there is no more gasoline in Moscow. At the moment, that's exactly it. Because I've been driving along the Moscow Ring Road, I've passed more than 15 gas stations. And you know what? That's right. There's no gasoline for any of them, at least 95th. I'm even ready to stand in line for an hour and pay twice as much as it was. I just paid $2,700 for 27 liters. Where can you even see that? I don't have any gas left. I've just been driving for an hour and there's no gas anywhere. And here's the question. Will I get to my local, will I find at least one gas station where I can fill up with your beloved expensive 95th after standing in line for an hour, if not more? Thank you.
By the way, important to point out here is that gasoline is now more expensive in Moscow than it is here in the United States. And of course, I don't need to remind you the per capita GDP or per capita income, the difference that is between a citizen here in the United States or a citizen in Russia. And on top of that, of course, it's very hard to find gasoline in Russia. Now, instead of covering what's happening, this is what Russian news channels are doing. They're basically telling people that, hey, back in my days, this is what the Russian television anchors are saying. They're telling them, back in our days, we had food rations. We couldn't even get enough food to, eat. Now you just have gasoline shortages. Just get used to it. This is happening on one of the biggest channels in Russia. Take a look.
No gasoline? Well, I and my generation still remember how food was actually on ration cards. Don't you remember? Or what?
In my city, in Krasnodar, in 1992, there were coupons. We cut them out and went.
And I personally went with buckets at the age of 11 to 12. And even earlier for water. Not for Coca-Cola or anything else, but for water. Because there was no water. A big barrel truck would come from several blocks away, and you had to go with cans and buckets to fetch it. This was right in the center of Krasnodar, not with a yoke somewhere out in the village. It really happened. We remember all of it. We're not making it up. But we got through it, didn't we? Yes, we did. And we'll get through this too. I have no doubt about that. They're doing all this so that we, just like in 1917, would run out, overthrow the Tsar father, and then make such a mess that even they, those Englishmen, would be horrified by what we'd done. I don't think we're in that kind of time right now. So I urge everyone, stay calm, stay calm.
Yes, it's hard. Yes, it's very hard.
By the way, this is the same woman who was telling at the beginning of this war, she was telling Ukrainians to get ready to greet Russian soldiers when they're marching in front of your house. And now she's telling Russians to calm down, just suffer through the pain. That's what happens. I think that's a perfect picture of how this war is going for Russians, how they were expecting it would go versus how it's actually going in reality. Now, for this week's members-only content, we again have former Navy SEAL Chuck Farr breaking down what's happening on the front lines. As you guys know, his analysis is exclusive to Basics Insider members. So if you want the full breakdown plus rest of our members-only content, you can become a member right now by clicking the join button down below or by going to basicsinsider.com. Your support is what keeps us going and makes it possible to continue this independent coverage. So thank you so much for everyone who's supporting us, and here we have Battlefield Breakdown. Take a look.
Finally, I know you brought this up a little bit, but I have a clip from CNN where they break apart the North Korean missile.
It's terrible to watch that. And giving the statistics, 95% of Russia's precision strike munitions target houses just like that little boy was in. They prioritize civilian targets. And what we're looking at right now is a United States manufactured circuit board that is part of the KN-23 short-range ballistic missile. There are dozens and dozens of Western components that are key to Russian weapons, including the Iskander. I would say you can probably be sure that the Oreshnik intermediate-range ballistic missile probably has these same circuit boards in it. You know, it's a very inconvenient fact that the night vision, thermal, and targeting optics in the Russian T-90 tank, they were all manufactured in France. So these components, these Western components, sanctions do bite, but obviously they're a bit permeable. But Russia, China, and North Korea, they absolutely depend on smuggling in these circuit boards because they cannot manufacture them themselves. So it's really hard to watch a piece of film like that. And I'm happy to remind our listeners that happens virtually every day in Ukraine. And it is not collateral damage. These are not accidents. These are the aimed targets, right? You live in an apartment block in Kyiv, you're a target. You've got a housing block where that little boy was living, you're a target. And this is what they intend to do, is sow terror.
And is there any advantage that Russians think they get that putting their resources targeting civilian infrastructure instead of targeting military infrastructure? Like, do they believe they have some kind of advantage? Like, it can help them win the war quicker by doing so? Like, why are they doing that?
You know, it's simple brutality. History has shown us that it doesn't work. The British were not bombed into submission in the Blitz, right? America did not bomb Hanoi into submission. No nation has ever been bombed into submission. And in fact, the Allies did not bomb Nazi Germany into submission. In 1945, the Germans made more airplanes than they had made in the previous entire length of the war. So this is just this Russian brutality. History shows us that instead of terrifying the people, it galvanizes them, it pulls them together, which is a basic psychological phenomena. If you stress a group of people, inevitably they pull together. But this is Russia partly out of frustration, and frankly, they can't find Ukrainian military targets. This war has shown us that in terms of signals intelligence, tactical intelligence, and even overhead imagery, Ukraine is light years ahead of Russia, because in addition to their own organic capabilities, they get first-class NATO orbital imagery every single day.
Ukrainian officials told CNN ballistic missile attacks by Russia were rising fast, 194 so far this year, and about a third of them, at least 60, were using North Korean KN-23s. But these crude missiles, part of growing aid as North Korean troops also come to Russia, rely on a sophistication smuggled into the Hermit Kingdom. One on display by Ukrainian investigators at this Kiev warehouse of missile fragments. It is a house of horrors. Drones that haunt the night skies, rockets that tear down lives. They pick through the dust to learn how the killing machines work, here rebuilding a Shahed Iranian drone's circuits.
Parts from a Kinjal missile, a Shahed Iranian drone and a Russian all-land reconnaissance drone, all things Ukraine has been subjected to for many months, but key, these North Korean KN-23 missiles rely, they say, on components from the United States and the Netherlands.
So, when they break apart something like this, is the main goal just to figuring out what's getting through the sanction, or are they learning something militarily that can give them an advantage too?
Yeah, we saw there that they had completely reconstructed the navigation and flight systems of Shahed drone. You do that so you can find vulnerabilities in the system. For example, putting that together, making it functional, you can find electronic warfare exploits for countermeasures to mess up its navigation, to mess up its flight controls, and a growing percentage of downed Shaheeds. And basically, 70% of Shaheeds get downed in every attack. Sometimes it's 100%. But a growing number of those kills are electronic warfare kills as well. But you always want to, it'll happen every time there is a precision weapon strike. They'll go through every little piece they can with the goal of completely assembling the flight control systems. So again, you can see how it works and how to break it.
This box, containing dozens of small bits of circuitry made by household names in the USA or Europe, subject to sanctions globally, but smuggled, often via China, to North Korea.
When you open all this up and find American components, how do you feel?
Чувствується, що якось не дуже станції працюють, тому що от залишки корпусу ракети, вся електронна начинка, вся іноземна. Корейського там нічого немає. Корейський тільки метал, який швидко ржавіє.
The journey the chips and circuits take to Russia may lead through North Korea, even China as a middleman, though ultimately they are US design and make.
Чіпами ми розуміємо, що в основному це є Сполучених Штатів, але країна-виробник може бути і Китай, і може бути Малайзія, тобто і Тайвань, самі. Але це є штаб-квартири, знаходяться, ми маємо на увазі Сполучених Штатів.
As the toll from these missiles deepens, Ukrainian officials say the Western firms need to be held accountable. From Thursday's Russian launch of a new weapon to their growing use of purloined North Korean missiles, the global reach of this war grows.
Yeah, there is another thing that that is an outfall of this. If you identify a company whose parts are showing up in North Korea, there is should be some scrutiny to that company. To whom did they sell? And the Iranians are expert at setting up shell companies, et cetera, et cetera. And frankly, though, it's hard to stamp out greed, right? People make these things, they want to sell these things, and perhaps they're not as careful as they should be about who gets them. And some of these circuits may appear completely innocuous. Some of them, frankly, no one has any idea that they had a utility in a precision weapons, especially in an intercontinental ballistic missile. But again, the sanctions are porous, and we're still not doing everything we can.
Yeah, and it's not even the company's fault, right? Like I read some report from Financial Times where the calculators that are shipping to, let's say, Kazakhstan or countries around Russia, they are shipping them back to Russia, and then they're taking apart the chips. For initial company, that'd be very hard to stop.
Yeah, exactly. And Kazakhstan is a major vector for everything from automobiles to thermal cameras to you name it. All these things that have utility on the battlefield. So again, if you're selling stuff to Kazakhstan, I think you ought to know where it's going to wind up.
Yeah, that's true. But it's also like that's where it's tough. Like I don't know how government officials.
Video card.
But it also shows the hunger, the technological hunger that Russia has. If you're willing to, get your hands on a scientific calculator to take it down so you get 2 or 3 transistors out of it, I mean, it shows how improvised these are, it's kind of ad hoc this technology is. And again, when Putin gets up there and bangs his chest and says, I have a super weapon, let's remember that some of it is, there are calculator parts in some of it. So, does the Oshrenik impress me? No, it doesn't. Does the recklessness of the Russian government and dropping, MIRVs onto a city? Yeah, I have taken note of that.